The presidents of US and China met today in their first face-to-face virtual summit. Amid rising tensions between the world's two largest economies, the leaders greeted each other with a wave and began the meeting cordially. President Xi Jinping said he was very happy to see his old friend, while his US counterpart Joe Biden said the two have never been that formal with one another. On the agenda was how the US and China can manage their growing competition to avoid a conflict. China Bureau Chief for the Straits Times, Tan Dawn Wei, who is based in Beijing, is here to discuss this further. Welcome back to the show, Dawn. Dawn, today's virtual meeting is the closest communication between the two leaders since President Biden took office in January. And to me, they looked rather at ease with each other, no signs of any tension. But what do you make of their tone and what they said to each other?
Well, they obviously have to play nice with the optics at the start of the meeting. So, they greeted each other with a wave and it was all very cordial, with Mr. Biden saying that he hopes that the next meeting will be face-to-face like they used to when they traveled through China. And Mr. Xi returned the courtesy by saying that he was happy to see an old friend. But what happened in the nearly 4 hours after that, behind closed doors, the mood, the tone, we don't actually know. But from the readouts provided by both sides, it would appear quite expectedly that both of them had gone in with a list of things that they wanted to raise. And for China, it was obvious that Taiwan was a priority. And also the issue of Chinese companies, being sanctioned in the US in the name of national security, or countries like the US using the human rights issue to interfere in the domestic affairs of China. But Mr. Xi said he was willing to talk about human rights, but it had to be done out of mutual respect. And from the Chinese readout, which was about 6 times longer than the US one, it was clear that Mr. Xi wanted to reiterate China's position, essentially, that the US shouldn't be telling it what to do. And China wants a relationship with the US that is based on mutual respect, and that he hopes to find a way where the two can, peacefully coexist. And on Mr. Biden's side, he also, quite expectedly took the opportunity to bring up the issues of, China's unfair trade practices, what China's doing in Xinjiang, in Tibet, and in Hong Kong, and also freedom of navigation in the region. So I would say that there were certainly no surprises in terms of what both sides wanted to emphasize and to reiterate.
Based on that list of things you mentioned, sounds like a myriad of topics were discussed in the 4-hour meeting. Out of all that, Dawn, what stood out the most for you?
I think we had all expected that Taiwan was going to be high on the list, on the agenda for Mr. Xi. And it did feature quite large based on the Chinese readout. But the language and the tone were pretty strong. And even though Mr. Xi has used such language before, but to drive it home like this to Mr. Biden, I think signaled quite a tough position. And Mr. Xi essentially blamed tensions in the Taiwan Strait, which has been on a high lately, on the Taiwan authorities' repeated attempts to, he says, rely on the United States for independence. And some in the US have also tried to play the Taiwan card to sabotage China, he said. So he called this trend very dangerous and playing with fire. And then he reminded Mr. Biden again that US administrations of the past have all abided by this one China policy and this 3 US-China joint communiques. And he said that, while we are patient and will do our best to achieve peaceful reunification, but if push comes to shove, we will have to take decisive measures. In other words, he's saying, we will have to take military action. But I think he also got the assurance that, he wanted, that he was seeking from Mr. Biden, who basically said, don't worry, we are committed to the one China policy. which essentially recognizes the People's Republic of China as the sole legitimate government of China. The US readout, however, added that the US's commitment to the One China policy is also guided by the Taiwan Relations Act and the Six Assurances, which commits the US to help Taiwan to defend itself. And those bits were missing from the Chinese readout. And I think Mr. Biden, too, got the assurance that he was looking for from Mr. Xi, and that there won't be any unilateral moves to change the status quo or to rock the stability in the Taiwan Strait.
So Dawn, with everything that transpired today, what's next? Will it pave the way for better relations between Beijing and Washington?
I think it was suggested in the readouts that there will be close communication from now on, and it could be across the spectrum from trade to security to climate change. So that is definitely a good sign. I think both sides do want to reestablish greater dialogue, maybe not at the political level because there would be too much scrutiny there, but at the working level, behind the scenes, where things can actually get done quietly. And I think today's meeting does feel like a reset of sorts, even though both sides were pretty much, trotting out the same spiel. But I think those things needed to be said for their audiences back home and for it to be registered. And so now, the real work begins.
Thanks, Dawn, for your time and your insights. I've been speaking with the Straits Times' China Bureau Chief, Tan Dawn Wei, who's based in Beijing.